everybody, and welcome to Highbrow Honey's The Beesness, your one and only source for a recap, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and why you should care of the arts world headlines from the last calendar week. Today we'll be looking back, of course, at May 24th through May 30th, and before we dive in, I'll give you just a couple little updates here. We do have some new reels coming out on Instagram in the near future. Be sure to catch those informational tidbits, especially the Sunday Secret Spotlight. We also will have an excerpt from one of my previous graduate school essays regarding Marie Bracamond and Impressionist artworks coming out on our Substack on the 14th. We finally have a new drop date for the masterful Mr. Right that will be arriving on June 20th. And yours truly is still job hunting. So if you see anything you think is worth my time and you're a person who has my email or phone number, please feel free to send that my way. And with no further ado, honeys, here we go. Some updates on stories past before we get to the new news, so to speak. French artists have called for a boycott of Pompidou's Seoul outpost over the partner foundation's ties to Israel. Wednesday's open letter regarding the Centre Pompidou Hanwha, opening very soon on June 4th, was signed by a range of well-known French artists who allege that the satellite museum is a, quote, art-washing operation masking profits derived from armed conflicts, end quote, which, quote, constitutes a moral compromise of cultural institutions, contributing to the normalization of wartime violence. We call for the termination of this partnership and urge artists and cultural workers to mobilize against it publicly, end quote. A bit of necessary background information here. Hanwha Foundation of Culture, the entity behind the upcoming center, is an arts-focused subsidiary of one of the largest conglomerates in Korea who, in 2021, made deals with two Israeli firms, Elbit Systems and Elta Systems, the former of which is reportedly Israel's largest defense contractor. The Hanwha Foundation has attempted to distance itself from parent entity Hanwha Group's activities more broadly, and especially these Israeli military operation connections, yet that petition indicates that this is not enough. The Pompidou's representatives did not respond to requests for comment before the recording of this episode, but we wanted to feature it because similar protests have also focused on a New York art space that received sponsorship from the Hanwha Foundation of Culture called Space 01, showing this broader push for the adoption of boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning in the arts projects produced by Korean companies with Israeli ties. That's a new format, a new angle on this grassroots strategy to deal with Israel in today's context. Turning back to the Biennale once more, the Kazakh Pavilion has been marred by controversy after one artwork failed to make it on view. Fallout from the reported dismantling of artist, and I'll do my best here, Asil Kadirhanova's presentation prior to the exhibition's opening has, according to Art News, quote, left fractures within the Kazakhstani art community and among the pavilion's organizers in Venice, with conflicting accounts emerging over who ordered the work's removal and why, end quote. A May 21st open letter signed by prominent members of the Kazakhstani art community and published on eFlux alleges that Kadirhanova's multimedia installation on Stalin-era repression in his nation was taken down on May 5th on the orders of the Kazakhstani Ministry of Culture or by individuals acting on behalf of the pavilion's organizers after negotiations between the artist and the pavilion's curator failed. That curator, Sirlibek Bekboda, has claimed that the pavilion team explored several alternatives with the artist that would have kept the work's concepts and thus allowed it to remain on view, and took personal responsibility for making the ultimate decision to dismantle the piece in its original form because, quote, as a curator, I was obliged to consider not only the fate of a single work, but also the functioning of the entire pavilion, the participation of all the artists, and my responsibility to the institutions that supported the project, end quote. Representatives of the show's venue, the Museo Storico Navale di Venezia, denied any hand in the work's removal, but the pavilion's own fund and organizing committees have since formally requested documentation from the museo's head regarding the circumstances of this removal. The why we care here. This is actually a tough one to call censorship on, even though it kinda obviously is, especially when we consider the validity of Bekboda's points on his responsibilities as well as the paperwork behind the scenes here. The February 26th contract signed by the Venetian Museum's managing company Deuva and a representative of the Kazakhstan Pavilion team, which was reviewed by our sources, includes a clause prohibiting the exhibition of works deemed, quote, political and ideological or propagandistic, end quote, while also maintaining the company's right to require, quote, the amendment, removal, or non-exhibition of any content, end quote, considered incompatible with the, quote, relevant contractual framework, end quote. So there's not actually a legal basis from which we can call censorship here. The signatories of that open letter have demanded three things: an apology from the Ministry of Culture and Information of the Republic of Kazakhstan by the Memorial Day for victims of political repression and famine in Kazakhstan, May 31st, the reinstatement of the work, with them covering the costs, and full documented transparency regarding the decision, including the naming of those who gave the orders. It is also somewhat unfortunate, honeys, that this is the focus on the Kazakhstan Pavilion instead of the fact that it's only the third official national presentation by them at the Venice Biennale, while marking the first time that a Central Asian nation has ever used an open call selection process for its pavilion. So, unprecedented in both good and bad ways. Last week also saw two of Trump's Washington, D.C. projects in the headlines. The first related to the contested no-bid contract to paint the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool a bright blue. According to newly obtained federal documents, allocated an inflated 20% profit margin to the construction company doing the job instead of the typical 6 to 12%. Which is drawing even more controversy given the fact that the entrance fees paid by visitors to national parks is funding $7 million of the paint job and leak repairs, reportedly costing now $13.1 US million, 7 times the initial price stated to journalists. Park Service documents reveal Virginia-based Atlantic Industrial Coatings, a company with no previous federal contracts, has yet to figure out how to actually stop the leaks, and thus has no completion date in sight, which is a sure frustration point for the administration given its 250th celebration plans. That headline also arrives just weeks after the Trump administration's Interior Department was sued by Cultural Landscape Foundation over the project's total steamrolling of normal federal review processes for such major changes to one of Washington's most recognizable historic landmarks. The Interior Department has defended the renovation as necessary maintenance work on the pool, which, quote, has suffered from leaks and algae problems for decades despite multiple expensive repair campaigns, unquote, according to our sources. The second project, Trump's proposed Arlington Triumphal Arch, which House Democrats moved to block last week in a forthcoming bill called the Arlington National Cemetery Viewshed Protection Act, announced by 2 Democrats, which would explicitly prohibit the construction of that proposed arch as well as the use of federal funds for it, and hopefully prevent future similarly non-congressionally approved structures elsewhere within the National Capital Region. We'll give you a quick reminder that critics of that particular arch, including historic preservation experts, argue that it violates the Commemorative Works Act, which requires the congressional approval of any new memorial on federal land in and around D.C. The legislation is, of course, expected to face opposition in Congress, despite already having more than 24 Democratic co-sponsors, but we think it's notable that a recent poll showed 52% of Americans oppose the arch versus just 21% in favor. Together, these two disputes highlight how Trump's quote-unquote safe and beautiful campaign has morphed these questions of monument design and preservation into increasingly political fights, wherein critics accuse the administration of overstepping and skirting the law, while supporters of such projects argue that they form overdue investments into some of the country's most popular civic spaces. A debate which will hit the House floor once again when the bill is formally introduced as expected during a Friday pro forma session. And an interview last week with Lonnie Bunch III suggested his imminent exit. Comments made by the current Smithsonian secretary during that interview with the New York Times about the forthcoming Smithsonian Castle exhibition, American Aspirations, suggested that he may be on his way out, as Bunch's allies on the museum board will likely become outnumbered by pro-Trump supporters this fall and no longer able to keep him at the wheel. While not confirming or denying exactly his departure, Bunch said that the June opening show, quote, is probably the last exhibition I will curate, there's no doubt about that, end quote. Bunch has notably resisted much of Trump's attempted influence on the Smithsonian, so we're very curious to see what happens if he leaves. Speaking of politics, a pretty shocking headline from last week, a new one too. A Miami politician has admitted to hiring billboard trucks targeting pro-Palestinian protesters at Art Basel, Miami Beach. After Intercept reported that a filing in Southern Florida District Court from earlier this month accused Miami City Commissioner David Suarez of hiring billboard trucks seen outside of the event art fair in December with personal attacks against pro-Palestinian protest organizers on their exteriors, Suarez confirmed to Art News that he was indeed the financial sponsor. The protesters in question were calling for a boycott over financial ties between Art Basel sponsors Swiss bank UBS and Israeli weapons manufacturer Elbit Systems, and included members of 4 groups including Jewish Voice for Peace. The trucks called Jewish Voice for Peace a quote-unquote extremist group and specifically labeled married members Alan Levine and Donna Nouveau as, quote, Jew haters, end quote. Suarez's email to Art News reads in part, quote, I will defend their legal right to say things I believe are evil, anti-Semitic, and disgusting, but free speech is not a one-way street. It does not mean they get to silence everyone who disagrees with them. If they want to bring their message into the public square, they shouldn't be surprised when others bring a response into the public square as well, even if that response is on wheels, end quote. Obviously, this comment was met with some backlash, and JVP is already suing the city over a specific ordinance that it claims was passed to discourage its protests. Further Intercept reporting indicates the group has asked in that suit that Suarez, Miami Beach Mayor Stephen Miner, and other officials be compelled to produce documents related to that case. This recent reveal is not likely to make those officials, Suarez especially, look good in the court's eyes. And I kind of hate to circle back to Trump here, but we have to. NBC reported that staff of the National Park Service installed an equestrian statue of Caesar Rodney, a Declaration of Independence signer who enslaved over 200 people, on Friday in D.C. as part of a collection of 13 statues gathered in the Capitol's Freedom Plaza for the commemorative 250th celebrations. The Interior Department told Hyperallergic that other featured statues depict various soldiers from the Revolutionary War, and this particular one had been taken down from its original spot in Wilmington, Delaware in 2020 in response to the Black Lives Matter protests, at which point the mayor of the town, Mike Perzicki, said that the Rodney statue and another statue of Columbus would be, quote, removed and stored so there can be an overdue discussion about the public display of historical figures and events. We can determine together what we value and what we feel is appropriate to memorialize, end quote. Trump himself lamented this particular removal and said that it was, quote, the end result of an extreme anti-American historical revisionism, end quote. And that's the why we care. This is not the first time that Trump has done this with a removed monument. Think back to the toppled and drowned Columbus statue duplicate he re-erected in March, and proves his determination to erase and diminish criticism of the country's past with slavery and other abuses. On a slightly more lighthearted note, British artist Ian Alexander has claimed that he worked with Trump on the design of the $250 bill. Reports by the Washington Post, among others, indicate that 2 political appointees at the Treasury Department have been pushing for the manufacture of prototypes of such a bill with Trump's face on it, and the artist who designed the mock-up, Alexander, confirmed to the Post that he'd spoken directly to the president about the design and that Trump's feedback was to add a logo and make it more colorful. Alexander added that his proposed design for the back of that bill had a quote-unquote women's liberation theme and included the likeness of Betsy Ross, and that he's been having a hard time getting regular feedback from Trump on other 250th anniversary-related art projects. It's unclear at this time what those are, as well as how he even got in touch with the Trump administration. And the why we care, surprise, surprise, this is illegal, per a law passed in 1866 which bans any living person from appearing on U.S. currency. Art Forum writes that not everyone in the federal government is on board with messing with this currency, even though the administration has attempted in the last year to pass a bill exempting the president from this restriction. An anonymous U.S. Mint employee told the Post, quote, these guys, members of the Trump administration, think you can just print something overnight and it's going to work in an ATM. It's just crazy, end quote, while pushback from officials in the Bureau of Engraving and Printing against printing the bills has led to at least one being abruptly reassigned. Trump may get his way yet again, though, as, quote, the Bureau is in the process of printing $100 bills featuring Trump's signature, which will be the first bills to bear a sitting president's signature, end quote, according to our sources. A little performing arts / outdoors highlight for the honeys. Last week also saw Patagonia sued drag queen Pattie Gonia for trademark infringement. The drag persona of Oregon-based LGBTQ+ and environmental activist Wynn Wiley took to Instagram to accuse the company of attempting to, quote, erase an activist, end quote, when it sued her in January for the meager sum of $1 plus attorney's fees, which themselves would add up to about $1 million, according to Pattie. The drag queen claims to have raised nearly $5 million for nonprofits that expand outdoor opportunities for LGBTQ+ and BIPOC individuals, but met this legal block within a month of filing a trademark application for her parody brand, Pattie Gonia. The company claimed that she violated a prior agreement between them by attempting to commercialize her drag name. At the heart of this, as you might imagine, is the question, is this discrimination? Is this trademark infringement? The company Patagonia's lawsuit likened the person Pattie Gonia's attempts to trademark her brand to the copycats Fratagonia and Patagonia and claimed that it had to enforce its trademark regardless of the ecological or political values of the alleged violator. Nevertheless, activists and LGBTQ+ advocates are voicing public outrage against the outerwear brand and calling for a boycott, especially after Pattie claimed in her social media post, quote, "This is how corporations bully individuals who cannot match their resources," end quote, and claimed that such an ongoing formal agreement never existed. Looking internationally, after 15 years in business, London and Lagos-based gallery Tiwani Contemporary, known for bringing attention to the art of African diaspora artists, has announced via Instagram that the London branch would be shuttered on May 28th and that the Lagos location will also close to allow, quote, restructuring in the months ahead, end quote. Now renowned artists who first showed there include Njideka Akunyili Crosby, Joy Labinjo, Simone Lay, Matthew Matayo, Emma Prempe, Barbara Walker, and Michaela Yearwood Dan. Founder Maria Vanarva explained in her own statements that the decision to wind things down was a painful one, but a responsible means to address, quote, the financial challenges the gallery faces in a difficult market, end quote. This is obviously a big loss for representation of Black diaspora artists, particularly in London, and as Art News put it, quote, is the latest in a succession of commercial art spaces to shutter in the last few years, a trend that has aroused anxiety about the state of the market from some observers, end quote, especially since this is the second major gallery to shut down in London this year. At the same time, outrage over the appointment of a Spanish art center director has drawn international attention to the nation. El País reports that the Galician Center for Contemporary Art is in internal uproar after the regional government appointed Eva Lopez Tarrio, a high school art teacher and civil servant with no significant curatorial or international art world experience, but who does have a fine arts PhD, to lead the prestigious Santiago de Compostela institution. More than 1,400 artists, critics, gallery owners, and academics across Spain signed an open letter warning that limiting the directorship to civil servants would, quote, impoverish and politicize, end quote, the center, including one PhD curator and lecturer at the University of Vigo who confirmed that she applied and called the selection process, quote, not based on professional merit, end quote. Not helping things in terms of the optics, the revelation that 3 of 5 members of the museum's advisory board have resigned in protest, as well as, quote, apparent errors in Lopez Tarrio's CV, including a claim that she worked for the Sierra Foundation before it legally existed, end quote. The why we care here. I personally care because I loved this museum when I visited at the end of my own Camino and would really hate to see it suffer. More professionally, this all leads us to the question of merit and the need for transparency in public institutions' decisions, how they decide who to hire and based on what qualifications. We also learned that an heir has said that a Cézanne watercolor shown in Basel was lost during the Nazi era and has started calls for its restitution. The 1888 Cézanne watercolor of the Montagne Sainte-Victoire was featured in the Fondation Bayer's recent exhibition dedicated to the artist, but Art newspaper reports that provenance researcher for the family of Gustav Schweitzer, Willy Korte, has found documents in the Swiss Public Archives backing Schweitzer's heirs' claims that the artwork in question was lost due to persecution during the Nazi era. Though it's not yet clear how the work left the family's possession, the researcher has stated it is the Foundation's obligation to withhold the painting from the unnamed private owners who loaned it to the exhibition due to that suspicious history, to which the Foundation Bayer responded that they had no legal authority to do so. The foundation went on to say that it has far less power to research the provenance of privately owned art on loan beyond checking international databases, and that the lender would be informed of these suspicions, but the artwork would be returned. Notably, though, a recent report on the collection concluded that a persecution-related loss could not be ruled out in the case of another of Schweitzer's works, a Van Gogh, and may become part of this debate as well. The argument is notable for arriving in the middle of a newly reignited scrutiny of Nazi-era provenance research in Switzerland, following on the heels of debates around the Emil Berle collection at the Kunsthaus Zurich, which means that a lot of people are talking, but the next steps remain uncertain here because the foundation does not want to be in the middle, yet they already are. We also heard that Russia struck Kiev and nearby towns with its largest attack on the Ukrainian capital city since 2024, early Sunday morning of last week, the 24th, damaging museums and cultural sites alike. Reports say that ballistic missiles and drones killed 4, injured about 100, and damaged schools, residential buildings, and approximately 40 cultural institutions/sites, including, per the Kiev Post, the National Chernobyl Museum and the National Art Museum of Ukraine. We are somewhat relieved to say, per Art News, that no artworks were harmed in the Museum of Ukraine, which was recently restored and opened in the summer of 2023. Only to have its exterior severely damaged on Sunday, but about 40% of the National Chernobyl Museum's artifacts were damaged beyond recovery by these attacks. The headline is significant not only because of that fact that it was one of the heaviest bombardments of Kiev since Russia's invasion began in 2022, per Reuters, it also supports top aide to Ukrainian President Kyrylo Budanov's statement to CBC this week that, quote, "This is a war against our culture, memory, and identity," end quote, while Artforum's reporting confirms that as of May 13th, quote, "There were 527 cultural sites in Ukraine that have been verified by UNESCO as damaged since Russia's invasion," end quote. And a new frontier sort of headline for us to handle, honeys, as well as a new frontier in and of itself. Online betting platform Kalshi has introduced prediction markets for art auction results. The controversial online prediction market, as well as another called Polymarket, introduced a new category that will allow users to bet on the outcome of individual art auction sales and total art auction profits, alongside other new categories. Kalshi itself has already processed tens of billions of dollars in trading volume since its operations were approved by the government in 2020, including some related to political bets. Per Artforum, quote, 3 congressional candidates were fined and expelled from the platform for betting on the outcome of their own elections, end quote. Speculation available on the site will mainly be limited to straightforward outcomes. For example, current offerings like will Basquiat break his auction record this season and Amedeo Modigliani Ome a la pipe sale price? Of course, the why we care here is this might go well, but it might go really, really badly. Valeria Votorako, legal counsel at Kalshi, framed this as a way for collectors to more efficiently liquidate as well as hedge their assets, saying, quote, "We're giving the art world the same financial infrastructure the rest of the economy takes for granted," end quote. All the same, questions about insider trading possibilities within auction house giants like Christie's or Phillips remain unsatisfactorily answered by reassurances about internal protocols in the face of darker real-life bets made on this platform, such as those on the war in Iran and the abduction of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Addiction experts in particular have expressed concern over the destructive risks that these platforms present to young adult users, especially those aged 18 to 21. And a few fascinating discoveries and announcements before we go. Last week saw the finding of the first artifacts from a Revolutionary War encampment of French troops. Metal detectorists Lafayette Scotty Crabtree Jr. and Greg Lagasse had been hunting for Civil War artifacts in a cornfield in Virginia when they made the find of 11 244-year-old buttons from France and coins from Spain and England dating from the early 1700s, which researchers now say belong to French soldiers resting in Fredericksburg on their way to join General George Washington in New York. As I said, why we care here, the first such find ever to be documented. Only one other French march has been excavated in Connecticut, but that's it. Also, although archaeologists were critical of the pair for removing so many of the artifacts before they could be studied in situ, they hope to find more at the site, which has been uniquely undisturbed, having been purchased to preserve a rare carnivorous plant, the purple pitcher, in its natural habitat by the nonprofit Meadowview. A heartwarming story and overlap between ecological preservation and history preservation. We also heard that tickets to see the long-sealed vaults beneath the Lincoln Memorial finally opening are already almost sold out, a decade after the National Park Service announced such plans to remodel the so-called Undercroft of the memorial. It is undergoing a $69 million US transformation into a 15,000 square foot exhibition space, which will host a show on the memorial's creation and the legacy of Lincoln himself that is scheduled to open next month. We also got word that a lost Leonora Carrington work will make its public debut. The storied but not frequently seen painting, Via Pilar of 1940, has resurfaced and is heading to the Freud Museum in London for an exhibition about the British Mexican artist's time at a psychiatric hospital outside of Santander, Spain, where she had fled after her partner, painter Max Ernst, was arrested in Nazi-occupied France. Carrington, who died in Mexico City at the age of 94 in 2011, just a few years before being rewritten into the feminist art history record, famously likened her sanatorium experience in her own memoir to, quote, being dead, end quote. The artwork itself features animal-human hybrids referencing a lion, a leopard, a peacock, a buffalo, and really this sense of being the occupants of a zoo, of being under observation. A second reason to feature this story, the show's closing date has been extended to August 10th to allow as many people as possible to see the canvas for the very first time in public starting July 1st, meaning you have more time to go see it. Do that! And finally, we heard that a French filmmaker is bringing the Louvre heist to a cinema near you. The brazen theft at the Paris Museum is set for a film adaptation of the brand new investigative book Main Baissée sur le Louvre, or A Grab at the Louvre of 2026, co-written by journalists at Le Parisien, Le Monde, and Paris Match. According to the publisher, the book shows how, quote, the theft of artworks has become a business like any other for many criminals, end quote. It will be directed by rising French filmmaker Romain Gavras amid the ongoing investigation and with those stolen jewels still at large, which is one of the reasons we care. The news of the adaptation's production before any of the 5 heist suspects facing charges go to trial is surprising. You would think they'd want to feature that sort of natural ending, but maybe that will come in another form as rights for a documentary series about the heist were sold separately to a yet unnamed British producer. That's what we've got for you this week. Hope you enjoyed your Beesness. Please let us know what you think about any of the headlines we have featured today, especially that betting platform one. I have my own opinions, but I'd like to hear from you too, honeys. We are going to head out and on to our other own tasks. Quick reminder to hydrate or dihydrate and take care of yourselves. We will talk soon. Everything you heard in today's episode of Highbrow Honeys the Beesness was researched, fact-checked, and presented by your host and master's degree holder, Celia Bugno, who also handled the editing and producing of the episode, and as always, Chris Meinhold is responsible for our music. Be sure to check out our new Substack article coming soon.